Thank you, Nina, and I would also like to thank Montenegrin Pan-European Union for invitation to this very interesting conference. As Nina said, my specialty is in international trade, but the subject that I will going to cover today, and this is carbon border measures, which carbon border adjustment mechanism is something which is also relevant for international trade, because this is a new mechanism that should be applied by all importers of the goods in the EU. This also affects all the countries in the region. So if we move on, you will see that from 2005 the European Union has something which we call emissions trading system, which is also some kind of charges that polluters that emit carbon have to pay, which they emit on the common market. And also the new policy is EU Green Deal, which builds upon this present system and sets some fixed targets, and one of the targets is to reduce the emissions by 55% until 2030. This is the setting for doing business in the EU, which means that the companies which pollute more are in some kind of need to pay for this. And this is a very huge stimulus, because many companies tend to relocate from the EU because of this, because of very strict environmental policies. And this hurts their competitiveness, not just in the EU, but also abroad. So usually they relocate their production, which is very carbon intensive, to some other countries which don't have such a strict policies. In the EU, they refer to this as a carbon leakage, meaning that they can pollute somewhere else and they import these products into the EU. And they view this as an unfair competition to their companies who are burdened by all these ecological policies. So they devised a new measure. This was planned in 2021, and it should be applied from 2023. And this is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and it requires all the importation to the EU of these products which they consider carbon intensive to pay certain charges at the border, and this is faced by all the companies importing into the EU. The European Commission also see it as an ecological measure, because they are trying to reduce this emission of greenhouse gases and so on. And they don't consider it as a tax or a custom duty. They think it's an economic policy measure connected to the environmental policy. As I told you, this legislation about this mechanism is enacted, and there is like a transitional period from 2023 to 2026, but it's going to be applied from this year, and it would be applied to a certain number of products, and you can see what kind of products it is. It's cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizers, electronic energy, and so on. And this graph shows the trading partners of the EU, which will be mostly affected by this measure. And you can see that there are two largest economies partners, Russian Federation and China, but also Turkey, United Kingdom, Ukraine, Korea, and so on, India. And also this is a graph produced in one report by UNCTAD, where they put Serbia and Montenegro together. So also our countries are involved, and you can see also that from the region, Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the countries who will be affected by these measures. Also here there is a more detailed table about the most important importers into the EU, these products that are affected by this measure. As I told you, there are very large partners like Russia, China, Turkey, United Kingdom. But for example, here you can also see Serbia, and these total imports of these products which will be hit by these measures. This is the number, and it's something like 10% of the Serbian exports to the EU. So it's a significant number. But if we look more in detail of each products. For example, iron and steel, you can still find, for example, Serbia, because we have this big iron and steel plant, which is operated by a Chinese company now. But for example, you can see other Western Balkan countries, for example, especially in the electricity, where Serbia will be hit the most, then Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, and even Montenegro. Yes, and Albania also. Why? Because we produce most of the electricity using this carbon. For example, in Serbia, 65% of the electricity is generated using this carbon and carbon-leaking energy products. So this will be very affected. And you can see, for example, in some other instances, for example, in cement production, Bosnia and Herzegovina also will be hit by these measures. So the Western Balkan countries should be prepared, because starting at the end of this year, they have to be involved in this system. So our exporters to the EU have to buy this certificate, and the system will be in place. In Serbia, it's a big problem because many of the companies are not even informed about this, and Chamber of Commerce is working on a technical assistance for them. So one big question is how the WTO will treat this mechanism, because in the WTO all these trade and environmental questions are looked at the different sides. We have this clash between environment and trade. And for example, EU claims that this mechanism is under WTO rules, but it is expected that the major exporters like China, Russia, India will challenge this at the WTO, and they will present it as a non-tariff barrier and also an additional charge to the exports, to their exports. When you consider all these rules, for example, the basic rule, the Article 1 of the GATT, it asks that all the partners should not be discriminated, and this means that these charges will fall only to certain partners. Why? Because EU has this mechanism where they exclude some countries from this, which are in their system, so it can lead to potential discrimination. EU will their position will be that this is under Article 22. Article 20, general exception, claiming that it's essential to tackle climate change, but also in this article it says that it cannot be and served as a disguised restriction on international trade. So they will have also to prove this. So just a few conclusions. So in the context of this Fit for 55 package, what is the view? This mechanism is not a self-standing measure. It's also incorporated in all these environmental policies, which should lead to this climate neutrality. This is the goal. And also there is a, let's say, direct link between this mechanism and this transfer system, which is also already introduced in the EU in 2005. EU tends to create this common and uniform framework to ensure the equivalence between the carbon policy and their application in the common market. So I think the EU importers, what is important, should start preparing for this mechanism, and the first quarterly report is expected in the fourth quarter of 2023. So thank you. This was my presentation.